Hello, I'm Stuart Clayton and welcome to Lick Library. In this lesson we're going to look at major scales and how we can go about learning all 12 of the major scales all over the neck of the bass guitar. And the goal of this is for you to be able to get around in any given key, not be confined to any patterns or anything like that, and just have real freedom on the bass. Now, scales are one of the most unpopular aspects of learning any kind of instrument. I think guitarists and piano players would agree with that. But they're really worth the time and effort that you put into learning them, and they really will free your creativity and abilities on the bass guitar. Now, the benefits that come about through learning your scales will include being able to get around the instrument in any given key, being able to solo over chord changes, be it in a jazz or a blues context or any other style, and being able to come up with your own bass lines, and just being able to communicate with your fellow musicians in a more professional way, really. Okay, so the key to working on scales in this way is to try to come up with some kind of regular practice regime. And assuming you practice an hour every day, which is what I would recommend, I'd try and get about 15 minutes of scale practice into that time with the exercises that we're going to look at in this lesson. Okay, it's also important that you work through the material at a speed that is comfortable for you. It's by no means essential for you to race through this lesson in order to get to the next one. Just take it at your own speed and just take your time with it. Okay, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions about you as a bass player. The first one is that you can already play the bass to some extent. The second, and probably the most important, is that you already know the notes on the fretboard, so you can sort of randomly point to any given note and name it instantly. And if you haven't got this kind of knowledge together, it's a brilliant idea for you to go and get that sorted out before you go any further. And the final assumption that I'll make is that you know what a major scale sounds like. And if not, I'm going to play a C major scale for you now. Okay, so that's the sound of the major scale, which I'm sure is familiar to you. We're now going to look at the construction of the major scale. And this scale, like any other, is built up of a series of intervals. And an interval is the distance from one note to another note. So we have two intervals we're going to look at for the major scale, and they are the tone and the semitone. Now, a tone is the distance from one note, for example C, to the note that's two notes away. So C to D on the bass. Okay, so we've got one note in the middle. The semitone is the distance between a note and the note right next to it. Okay, so C to C sharp. That's the semitone. And the tone. Okay, now this particular series of intervals makes up a major scale, and we're going to look at those now. So we have C to D, that's a tone. Then we have D to E, another tone. E to F, this is a semitone. F to G, a tone. G to A, another tone. A to B, a tone. And finally, B to C, a semitone. Now that series of tones and semitones, which goes tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, will always result in a major scale no matter where you play it from on the neck. So if I, for example, play from F on the A string and play that same pattern of tones and semitones, I'll get an F major scale. Now, if you were to alter the series of intervals or change any of the intervals, you would result in a different scale. Okay, so we're going to use that knowledge to play the major scale now in all 12 keys. Now, we do this according to a thing called the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is an illustration of the 12 keys that looks rather like a clock face. You have C at the 12 o'clock position, and then the next key, which is a fifth away, is G, so that's at 1 o'clock, and then so on. You move around in fifths in that order. And you should be able to find an example of this in any good music book or on the internet. Okay, so we're going to play through all 12 major scales now, starting with C. Okay, the next scale is G. D, A, E, B, F sharp or G flat, that key can be known as either name. D flat, A flat, E flat, B flat, and the last key is F. So that's all 12 keys as dictated by the circle of fifths. Okay, now that makes for a really good warm-up exercise as well as a good exercise for getting around the fretboard and playing all of your major scales. And it's really important that you stick to some kind of sensible fingering pattern for these scales, and I'm using the finger per fret theory, whereby if I start on my second finger, the rest of the scale falls really neatly under the rest of the fingers, and I don't need to change position or anything. Okay, we're now going to look at the C major scale in particular, and we're going to abandon the fretboard pattern that we've just learned, and we're going to adapt a theory that I use called content over patterns. Now this enables you to play a major scale in any key all over the fretboard without being restricted to an area of the fretboard. If you learn a pattern for a scale, be it 1 octave or 2 octaves, you're kind of stuck within that pattern. So this is a way of breaking yourself free of that. And the way we do it is by learning the content of the scale, and that is the notes that are contained within it. So the C major scale contains all natural notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. So we've got no sharps or flats, so it's the perfect place to start. Now, if you combine that knowledge with your excellent knowledge of the fingerboard, you should be able to play a C major scale just on one string. So that's what we're going to try now. We're going to play C major, starting from the C at the 3rd fret of the A string. I'm going to play a 1 octave scale up and back, just using this content over patterns theory. Here we go. Okay, now that's possible because I know the notes in the scale and I know the fretboard really well. Now you can choose different Cs on the bass and do the same thing. Let's try the C from the 5th fret of the G string. You could try the C at the 8th fret of the E string. And there are all sorts of different ways you can play the same thing, okay? But by adapting this theory, you won't be stuck to any kind of pattern. Okay, now the next thing is to upgrade that to a 2 octave C major scale. And once again, I'm going to play through C major over 2 octaves. I'm not going to use any kind of pre-planned patterns or anything like that. I'm going to let my knowledge of the scale guide me through it and my knowledge of the fretboard. Okay, here we go. Okay, so that was the C major scale over 2 octaves, and you can see that I covered that much of the fretboard, which is a substantial portion of it, and I didn't restrain myself to any patterns or anything like that, so I've got free knowledge of the scale over that amount of space. Okay, so that's the C major scale. The next step is to learn the other 11 scales, and while that might seem quite daunting, they actually are arranged on the circle of fifths in quite a logical way. The next key, G, uses all of the same notes as the C major scale, apart from one. The F becomes an F sharp. So as you go around the circle, you take the notes from the previous scale and just add a sharp or a flat if you go in the other way. So the G major scale is going to contain G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. Okay, so it's basically the same thing as C, but we've got an F sharp in there. So let's try that on one string. Okay, let's try that from the open G. Okay, and once again we can upgrade that to be a 2-octave G major scale. No patterns have been thought through before this, just again using my knowledge of the scale. Okay, now you might notice that on that occasion I ascended the fretboard in a certain way and then descended a different way. And that's another way that you can get even more practice out of this one exercise, and you can get even more use of the fretboard if you just ascend one way and descend a different way. Okay, so that's the first 2 scales, and rather than me talk you through the other 10, it's down to you now to go and study those according to the order they appear on the circle of fifths. The next one will be D, the next one will be A, etc., etc. Like I said, I'm sure you can find a good example of it in a music book. Now, the final exercise that we're going to look at is a longer sort of development of the C major scale that we looked at earlier on. And this enables you to use even more of the fretboard. What we're going to do is play in the key of C major from the lowest note on the bass that is available in that key, which in the case of C is the low E. We're going to play upwards through the scale for 4 bars with a note on each beat, and then we're going to descend 4 bars, and that should take us neatly back to the first note. It's better to play it than explain it, so here we go. Okay, so that's the C major scale using as much of the fretboard as I can possibly do on those first 12 frets. Now, there is a way that you can use this to exploit areas of the fingerboard that you're perhaps not so comfortable with. Some students find that the upper levels of the E and A strings are a weak point for them, so you can adapt this exercise to focus on those, like so. So what I'll do here is I'll ascend the E string up to about the 17th fret and then work across onto the A string. Okay, so I ascended most of the way on the E string and then went all the way back down the A string, so I'm getting full use of those strings. Now, another thing that I find that students don't like doing is using open strings, and again, this exercise is ideal for exploiting that. So let's start on the open E again. We'll work across using open strings where possible, and then head up to the 12th fret on the G string. Here we go. Okay, so by the time you've gotten through this much of the C major scale, you should find that you know it really well on the fretboard. So the next step is to tackle that in the key of G. Now, once again, in the key of G, the lowest note that we have on the bass will be the open E. So we're really just playing the same thing, but we're just sharpening all the Fs. If you remember, the key of G has got an F sharp in it. So let's just try that in a random way that I'll now just think of. Here we go. Okay, now your goal should be to work up this exercise in all 12 keys. So you'll play through in the key of C, just as I did, then you'll go through the key of G, then you'll go through the key of D, etc., according to the circle of fifths. Now, in doing so, you'll be doing three things at once. You'll be giving your scales a really good workout and your brain as well. You'll be working on your fretboard knowledge, okay, so you're cementing that even further. And you'll be working on your ear as well, and you'll be warming up. Now these exercises make for much better warm-ups than the sort of chromatic permutation exercises that you might have been practicing. They're very good for finger strengthening, but they're not very melodic, whereas these exercises will have you playing stuff that's more diatonic and will have a little bit more real-world application. Okay, so you're doing three things with one exercise there, so it's a really good thing to get to grips with. Okay, well I hope that's been of some use. Keep practicing and let me know how you get on, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks.